Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov couldn't be with us here today, but he is joining us via video link from Moscow with open remarks followed by an interview with Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor, James Bays. But first, Foreign Minister Lavrov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. Indeed, I planned to be with you today, but life is full of circumstances, and thank you very much for understanding my circumstances. Anyway, I did not have the privilege of listening to the previous discussions, but I assume that you were discussing the multipolar world, which is emerging after 500 years of domination of what we call the collective West, which domination was based on quite diverse history, including ruthless exploitation of peoples and territories of other countries. In any case, on the basis of this 500 years, the United States and its allies, they built the model of globalization, which they believed would serve them well to continue to be number one in economy, in military exercises, in culture, politics, and so on and so forth. And they thought that they would be using this globalization scheme to continue their domination. However, other countries, using exactly the principles and instruments of the Western globalization, managed to beat the West on its own turf, building the economies on the basis of national sovereignty, on the basis of balance of interests with other countries. And as this process continued, the new centers of economic growth, of financial power, and of political influence started to emerge. And we see this process very much underway, which is clearly changing the balance of power in the world, and not to the West liking. And in order to suppress this kind of development, to suppress any dissent, our Western colleagues decided to sacrifice all the principles of globalization which they have been selling to everybody for decades and decades, including free market, fair competition, inviolability of property, presumption of innocence. All this was sacrificed for the sake of rules-based world order. The rules were never published, were never even announced by anyone to anyone, and they are being applied depending on what exactly the West needs at a particular moment of modern history. This is especially seen in various conflicts which the West ignites all over the world. Anything goes to keep the hegemony, intervention in domestic affairs, sanctions against all the principles of fair competition, regime change, and of course direct military interventions like we have seen in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, in Libya, Syria, and elsewhere. By the way, the analysis of all these events raises a question: is there a single place where the United States intervened with military force, where life has become better? I think you know the answer. Ruined statehood, human tragedies, and very, very bleak prospects for the future of the countries where the Americans and NATO interfered. Ukraine, of course, is another example. By the way, even allies of the United States are not spared when the Americans want to do something to keep their hegemonic position. They made sure that European Union bears the brunt of the adventure against Ukraine, economically, especially from the point of view of cheap energy. Former cheap Russian energy is being replaced by expensive American liquefied natural gas, and examples of deindustrialization of Germany and other European countries are plentiful. I would not dwell upon them. My point is that we have to recognize the objective course of history, which is the evolution of a multipolar world. We have to accept that new organizations, new formats, new structures like BRICS, like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, African Union, and many sub-regional organizations in Africa, CELAC and sub-regional groups in Latin America, they are going to be the BRICS, small letters, the BRICS of the new polycentric world. This must be recognized as an objective course of history, as I said, and this must be respected. Respect is something which we actually miss when we analyze the modern Western diplomacy, but this is for the West to draw conclusions. I think I stop here.
Yep. Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Lavrov. I'm James Bays, the diplomatic editor of Al Jazeera, and we're going to continue a conversation now with Foreign Minister Lavrov. This conversation for everyone in the room, but we're also going to broadcast it very soon on Al Jazeera. Sergey Lavrov, Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera here at the 2023 Doha Forum. Can I start by asking you about the war on Gaza? We now have more than 17,000 people killed in 2 months in Gaza, and efforts to get a ceasefire have not got anywhere because the US used its veto in the Security Council. Do you see any hope of diplomacy to bring the conflict to an end in the near future?
Well, there is always a hope for diplomacy, and this is what we have been trying to do since the beginning of the current wave of violence. We strongly condemned the terrorist attack against Israel on the 7th of October, like we condemn any terrorist attack. At the same time, we do not believe it's acceptable to use this event for collective punishment of the millions of Palestinian people with indiscriminate shelling of the civilian quarters. You mentioned the number of casualties. They are growing day after day, and those who suffer most are the kids and women. And the facts about what is going on we can see on your and other channels every passing hour. We have introduced, very soon after this tragedy started, we have introduced a resolution in the Security Council. It was blocked by the United States. Brazil introduced another resolution. It was also blocked by the United States. Then the General Assembly passed a resolution which was weaker than what we wanted in the Security Council, because it provided not for humanitarian ceasefire, but rather for humanitarian truce. But even that was not acceptable to the Americans and other Western countries. They did not support that resolution, and eventually they organized the Security Council to pass a decision, a resolution, which called, not demanded, but called for humanitarian pauses. This resolution is better than nothing, but even this weak appeal we cannot see materialized, because to do this we need some kind of monitoring on the ground. Maybe United Nations Relief and Work Agency in Palestine could serve the role, but we addressed the Secretary General, suggesting that he used his authority to consider some kind of monitoring, but so far to no avail. But this does not mean that we all should stop trying. We should do everything in our power to continue this political pressure to achieve the humanitarian ceasefire.
Foreign Minister, that US veto in the Security Council, how do you think it will affect the way the US is seen in the region? Let me read you a tweet from the Yemeni Foreign Minister, Badr al-Busaidi, which he wrote after the veto. I deeply regret the United States should sacrifice the lives of innocent civilians for the cause of Zionism. Long after we're gone, the world will look back on today with shame.
Well, it's up to the regional countries and other countries in the world to judge for themselves as regards the American veto. For us, we have made our conclusion long ago, and the egoistic nature of the decisions the American foreign policy provides are very well known to us. You know, you mentioned about this veto, and when vetoing this resolution, the American representative in the Security Council room said that they cannot support the demand for immediate ceasefire in Gaza, because this will sow the seeds for the next war, quote unquote. You know, the Americans are very good at what we call cancel culture. Whenever they don't like some part of history or some part of events, they just cancel what preceded it. So by saying that by announcing a ceasefire, we will sow the seeds for the next war, I mean, we have to recall what was the roots, what are the roots of the situation in the Palestinian territories. What is the situation with the more than 75 years of resolution promising the state to the Palestinians is being sabotaged, and for about 50 years the blockade of Gaza continues. You know, one of the, I don't remember who it was, but one of the official of the Israeli government, he said that those are not actually civilians, because the Palestinians in Gaza, when they are 3 years old, they are already extremists. Well, there is some truth in it, but we have to understand the reason why the kids and youth in Palestine are being brought in the feeling that they have been victimized for decades, for decades and for generations. We have been telling our Israeli colleagues many years ago, I myself, when we had close contacts with the predecessors of Eli Cohen, I was several times drawing the attention that the single most dangerous factor igniting extremism in the Middle East is the unresolved nature of the Palestinian statehood.
Foreign Minister, there'll be people watching here in the audience and watching on television who'll be saying, yes, he's absolutely right about the high level of civilian casualties, but they'll say, what about what Russia has done in the past? And I'll come on to the Ukraine war later in our interview, but if you go back to Chechnya, the high level of civilian casualties, if you go to Syria, the bombardment of hospitals, aren't you being hypocritical here?
Well, it's up to you to judge. I don't believe I am hypocritical or Russia is hypocritical. We never have been hiding the operations which we entertained in the Republic of Chechnya. We never have been hiding what we have been doing in Syria at the request of the legitimate government, member of the United Nations, fighting ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and other organizations which have popped up after the American interventions in Iraq, when Al-Qaeda was created, then in Libya, Jabhat al-Nusra, and you know this story. And we will continue.
Yes, Foreign Minister, I know the story.
We will continue to fight terrorism.
Yeah,
exactly,
I know
exactly.
I know the story because in
rules.
2015, I asked you at a news conference at the United Nations about this, about those groups, and you said if it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist. Well, what is Russia's view of Hamas? Because Israel, Western countries, the European Union, they say they're a terrorist organization. I note that a Hamas delegation visited Moscow in October. Do you think Hamas should be part of the post-conflict resolution here?
You're much better at interrupting people than I am. Indeed, Hamas committed terrorist attack on the 7th of October, which we condemned immediately. Hamas has a political branch which operates in Doha, and we have relations with this political branch, and we immediately got in touch with the people in Doha to negotiate the fate of the people taken hostages, Russian citizens, but not only Russian citizens, Israeli citizens, citizens of the neighboring country to Russia, and some others. And we managed to reach a deal which, as far as I can say, Israelis understand and even appreciate it as far as their citizens are concerned.
Foreign Minister, the Secretary General of the United Nations, there were calls from the Israelis for him to resign after he said October the 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. He was right, wasn't he? The US tried to take the lead role in diplomacy, and in fact has taken the lead role in diplomacy on this matter for decades now, but they've been ignoring the Palestinians.
Well, I think everybody can understand and can agree that this happened not in a vacuum, and I referred to the decades and decades of blockade, decades and decades of unfulfilled promise that the Palestinians would have a state, living side to side with Israel in security and good neighborliness. I cannot, you know, it's about cancel culture. Whatever you don't like in the events which led to a situation, you cancel. It's like you mentioned Ukraine. It's like everything which took place before February 2022, including the bloody coup, unconstitutional change of power, including the war against Donbass, which did not accept the coup, the illegal change of power, and did not accept the power of putschists. All this was cancelled. The only thing which remained, Russia invaded Ukraine. But the Minsk agreements, which were openly sabotaged by the Germans, the French, and the Ukrainian president at that time, all this has been cancelled. And the hybrid war against Russia launched by United States and NATO is based on this cancel culture.
Foreign Minister, talking about the war in Ukraine, recently the Ukrainian side, the head of their armed forces, said there was a stalemate. He got into some trouble with President Zelensky for saying that. But would you agree with that assessment? On the battlefield right now, there's a stalemate.
Well, it's up to the Ukrainians to recognize how deep they are in the hole where the Americans put them.
Well, if it's a stalemate, aren't you in that hole too?
Well, it's up for the military to assess the situations in which they find themselves.
But as Russia's chief diplomat, I mean, if you look at this war, I don't know how many people have been killed on either side. There are so many different estimates, but all of them seem to be very large figures with tens of thousands on either side. And this was a war of choice by Russia. I know you call it a special military operation, but President Putin decided to invade. What has Russia achieved in the last 22 months?
Well, I know that whatever I say in my previous intervention, you would still be reading from your paper, which you printed before the beginning of this session. I mentioned the phenomenon of cancel culture. It's not a war of choice. It's the operation which we could not avoid, given the years and years and years of Ukraine being prepared by the United States and NATO as an instrument to undermine Russia's security. If you have interest, I will send you the list of the legislation Ukrainian government passed after the bloody putsch in 2014 to cancel everything Russian. Russian language, Russian media, Russian culture, Russian education, everything. And this is against the people who for generations have been living in the eastern and southern Ukraine. This has been all cancelled, and the only thing which the Western media is being encouraged to say is Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia started the war of choice. What was the other choice? If your nation, your people are physically exterminated, and this is cemented in legislation of the country where Nazist regime holding power.
I spoke recently to the President of Brazil, President Lula da Silva, and he said there should be a ceasefire right now and negotiations. What do you think are the chances, the real chances of any diplomacy?
You have to call Mr. Zelensky because a year and a half ago he signed a decree prohibiting any negotiations with Putin government. And this is a well-known fact. Putin repeatedly mentioned this when asked similar questions. They had a chance in March and April 2022, very soon after the beginning of the military operation, when in Istanbul the negotiators reached a deal based on the neutrality of Ukraine, no NATO, but some other security guarantees given to Ukraine by the West and Russia together. This deal was aborted, it was cancelled, because the Americans and the Brits decided that if Putin is ready to sign it, then let's exhaust him more. So that's what they're doing now. Stalemate or no stalemate, that's the fact.
When you look back to the beginning of the war, there was a General Assembly resolution that Russia should pull back its troops from Ukraine. At the time, there were 141 states in favor of the motion. As things stand now, do you think the global position has changed, the perception of Russia has changed?
Well, that resolution, I know how it was adopted. I have many friends in New York, and they were privately telling me that the means used by the Americans to get that many votes were really very, very specific. The ambassadors in New York were approached by junior diplomats from an American or British mission, and the question was raised, Mr. Ambassador, please don't forget that the vote is tomorrow, and don't forget that your bank account is in Merrill Lynch, that your kids are in Stanford. I am not exacerbating. It was exactly the means applied. And look, if the Americans...
So people were bribed?
If the Americans... Let me interrupt you for a change. If the Americans are champions of democracy, as they say, look, what happened in February 2022? We repeatedly, for many years, we have been saying that Ukraine in NATO is unacceptable. In December 21, we suggested to US and NATO a treaty guaranteeing security in Europe for everyone. This was rejected. The Minsk agreements have been undermined, and the people cynically said that they never intended to implement them. They needed to gain more time to put more arms into Ukraine against Russia. Anyway, we started this operation. Putin made a special address. He explained everything which lied behind our action. The Americans and the satellites condemned it strongly. Okay, the others, the global south, the global majority, they should be treated as grown-ups. And they should have decided on their own, having listened to us, having listened to the West. This would be democratic way of treating countries of the world. We never, ever pushed anybody into any position. We just presented the reasons why we did it. The Americans and the Europeans, NATO, EU members, they were running all over the world, not just presenting the assessment of what is happening in Ukraine, but putting ultimata, blackmailing, threats, sanctions. Unless you condemn Russia, there would be consequences. You know how they behave. This is their usual style.
You mention the expansion of NATO, but the result of your war is that there are far more NATO troops now on Russia's borders. Sweden wants to join NATO. Finland's already joined NATO. You now have a doubling of the border between NATO and Russia. So it's backfired, hasn't it?
You know, in the beginning of 19th century, Napoleon assembled almost entire Europe to attack Russia. And we defeated him, and we became stronger after that aggression. In the middle of last century, Hitler did the same. He put under his command most of the European countries to launch aggression against Russia. He was defeated as well, and we became stronger after that war. And the result of the war launched by the United States using Ukraine against Russia is already seen. And you mentioned the expansion of NATO, but the main result for us and for others, by the way, who would feel this result later, is that Russia has already become much stronger than it was before these events. And this would be the case after the war has finished.
Let me go back to August, when Yevgeny Prigozhin was killed, when his plane was blown up. That is still very suspicious. No one knows exactly what happened, although people have suspicions. He ran the Wagner Group that had tentacles in Africa, in Libya, Mali, Central African Republic. Can you tell our audience what now happens to those Wagner operations? Have they been subsumed into the Russian chain of command? Because there are all sorts of human rights allegations, torture, executions that were made against those Wagner fighters.
Well, the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin has been investigated by the Russian Investigation Committee. The results have been made public. So on this one, I don't have anything to add. As regards the soldiers from Wagner Group, well, there were many reports by the Russian government, by Belarusian president, by the way, how the fate and the future for these people has been discussed. Quite a number of them went to Belarus and started to serve there, to undergo military service there. Others joined the regular structures of the Russian army, and they continue to serve.
There are important elections taking place in Russia and the US this year. I think we know who is probably going to win in Russia. In the United States, and it's 11 months, a long time in politics, Donald Trump may well be the Republican candidate. He's looking like he may well be the Republican candidate. For Russia, would that improve relations with the United States if Donald Trump was back in the White House?
You know, we respect the American people, and we would not make any remarks which would be which would look as if we don't. I remember what the reaction was by the Democratic Party after Trump won in 2016. And by the way, we still remember how President Obama, 3 weeks before Trump's inauguration, expelled dozens of Russian diplomats with their families, making sure that the departure was as uncomfortable as possible, and then introduced sanctions against Russia for interference in the American domestic affairs. Since then, they never could provide a single proof that this lie has any substance behind it. So I leave not I leave the American electoral system and habits to their own devices. I wouldn't like to get into this.
Finally, Mr. Foreign Minister, you are, I believe, the second longest serving foreign minister in the world. You're the longest serving foreign minister of Russia since Tsarist times. And of course, you were at the diplomatic top table before this for 10 years as the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. In a few months' time in March, you'll have served for 20 years as Russian foreign minister. How long do you think you're going to go on in this job?
I really don't understand why you're asking this question. I serve my country as long as my country needs me.
Thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov.
Thank you.